Tonight's conversation between Reinhold Martin and Jeff Kipnis, What Good Can Architecture Do?, is part of an ongoing series of events in the architecture department that aim to elucidate divergences, different perspectives on the history and currency of modernism and postmodernity. The aim is to elucidate tendencies and claims, whether they be apolitical or political, ironic or earnest, cynical or moral, decadent or righteous. And tonight, matters of agency and effect will be our focus. Frequently, they are seen as opposite terms of commitment in the schools today. In the summer of 2009, Reinhold Martin, the director of the Wexner Center for the Study of American Architecture, held a one-day summit of sorts, though he pointedly did not call it that, of architects, theorists, and leaders of architecture schools to discuss a number of current crises, made most conspicuous by the economic meltdown. He structured the day by dividing it in two while expressing some reluctance to do so. Morning to confront architecture from the outside, so to speak, and afternoon to address those problems that emerge from within. Recalling CIAM and Team 10 on the one hand and Charlottesville tapes and any on the other, he proposed that whatever urgent questions and responsibilities facing our discipline, quote, we must insist that at best they represent only half the story, for architecture is also self-evidently an art form, as much as it is, or some would say more than it is, a technical or socio-economic practice. Thus, also the necessity of dealing with the intangible aesthetic questions, the esoteric, if you will, with which the discipline is notoriously plagued, but from which it also draws much of its internal energy and arguably its meaning, end quote. If Martin expresses his skepticism of form while finding himself extolling its irrefutable power, Jeff Kipnis is a more stalwart critic of the other side of the equation. Indeed, he can always be counted on to thwart the alliance of architecture with servitude or with science. Martin's books, The Organizational Complex and Utopia's Ghosts, Architecture and Postmodernism, again, delve deeply into crises in architecture, outside moving in, illuminating the beauty and havoc wrought on the post-war landscape. Kipnis began inside looking out in some of the most important texts to have done so, and then turned it all on its head with his seminal work, Mood River, which has, to use Reinhold's term again, plagued the discipline ever since. No longer is architectural discourse to be dominated by the problem of making buildings speak meaningfully, whether through defamiliarized symbols or abstract indices. Instead, it argues for the rigorous or approximate forms that merge with cultural politics, with inscrutable sensations. It is first and foremost about the production of affect. Clearly, we have two distinct perspectives here. The format for tonight, in order to affirm or to articulate doubt about architecture's relative agency or authority, Martin and Kipnis agreed to use an assessment of housing, in a way, as a case study. Each will give a talk of about 20 minutes, to be followed by a discussion in which they will ask questions of one another. We flipped a coin, or we're pretending to have, to determine who will go first, and that will be Jeff. So please join me in welcoming, Jeff Kipnis and Reinhold Martin. Jeff.
Thank you, Scott. Is this mine? Yep. I've never done this before. I probably won't do it now. This is not my, I was going to read a little something that I wrote. The computer's in lock. Oh, I now know all the passwords. The reason we didn't actually flip a coin is Scott tried to borrow one from us, and we weren't willing to give it to him. Let's see, 20 minutes, timer, 20 minutes, get ready, get set. Go. Thank you for having me, everyone. It's nice to be here. It's nice to be here. It's particularly nice to see Scott come back here. I have so many friends here. It's always fun to go back here. I love playing the piano. This is the third time, I think, Reinhold and I have discussed some of the topics that we're discussing. One time we had almost an acrimonious encounter at Columbia with Carl Chu, who is also here today. Acrimonious because of convictions and passion. I have a deep respect for him, and I hope he feels somewhat similar to me. But we do approach problems differently. The second time in London, and it's where Reinhold became most explicit about his interest in the function of something like the truth, or the function of the truth, not necessarily metaphysically the truth, but the function of the truth in architecture and its histories, and I'm also quite interested in that. And then finally, for reasons that had nothing to do with this particular encounter, I was interested in I made a proposal to Scott, which I thought I'd read you a little bit about my concerns about an increasing scientism or pseudo-scientism in architecture, which I think is becoming like the bed bugs of New York hotels and architecture. And so I made a proposal to Scott to address that. I will read a little bit about the proposal. And then that evolved into this discussion. And so the combination of how does architecture do good, or can architecture do good, and if so, what good can it do, and how does it do it, got married to this discussion that was ongoing between Reinhold and I about the nature of the truth and how that worked in the field. So that's sort of how we started. I guess the talk, the fundamental question I think we were asking is what model of knowledge should guide a contemporary architectural approach to new building? That's my interest. I'm interested in new building. I'm also interested in new building that's not necessarily allegiant to customary values: comfort, cost, convenience, pride, pleasure, familiarity. Those are the 7 in relationship to codes that are considered the most frequently cited values for new persons buying a home or housing. Those are those 6 values, plus they don't want it to burn down and fall down, so codes. And so I thought it was important to focus on the question of new building, because I think of architecture is clearly a discourse, so it has expert practices in history and technology and other questions. But for me, I just want to, basically I'm interested in the problem of setting the stage for new building rather than interpreting and evaluating existing work. It's worth noting, for example, that the study of literature is not necessarily the same as the study of writing, nor is the study of music the same as the study of composition. We take it for granted that the apotheosis of architectural discourse and education is to be found in its influence on new buildings, despite a great deal of evidence that is not the case. So this is just to state my bias. That said, I wanted to summarize what I consider the situation briefly. I think there are 3 distinct models of architectural knowledge that we are now considering as it pertains to new building. One is that architecture is a service profession. The second is that it's a cultural practice. Or thirdly, that it's an applied human science based respectively on business for the professional practice, with the profit and client satisfaction as the basis of arbitration, the humanities with disciplinary discourse as the basis of arbitration, and sciences with an idealized generic individual and collective beneficiary of measurable reproducible effects as the basis of arbitration. So I think those are the 3 reasonable models of knowledge. Now, interestingly, I don't think anyone would contest the fact that in terms of the history or daily architectural practice, none of these models is wholly adequate, and moreover, each has made a definite seminal contribution. The real question then is how to teach architecture, since any coherent pedagogy must choose one of the models and should do so on the basis of its ability of that model to absorb the intelligence generated under the aegis of the other models. So I think that's basically how I wanted to set this up. I'm obviously going to come down on the side of disciplinarity, and I believe disciplinarity is better able to absorb the intelligence generated by both professional practice, legal practice, economic practices, and on the sciences, rather than jettisoning the discipline, its histories, and its intelligence. Now, the nature of a disciplinary intelligence is what I want to discuss when I show these slides, because I locate architecture in the arts. Now, I'm sure you've seen this picture. Most of you must. How many of you find it revolting? Hold your hand up if you. Now, I think that's extremely interesting. It's revolting because the headline is most expensive house ever built. This is in Mumbai. It's by Ralph Richardson and Perkins and Wills. Now the question is, just because it's such an extraordinary, extravagant waste of money, is it really mean it's bad architecture? Or is it actually quite an intelligent building architecturally? So that has to do with something that I think you face. Can I go to the next slide, please? And that is a new future, a future that we don't have. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that future. And I think, I read this article. I thought a couple of things were really interesting to me about this magazine. One is a reasonably convincing plan for a sustainable future by 2030. Now, it's 2010. That means in 20 years, the problem could, in principle, be solved. It won't be solved in 20 years, but it could, in principle, be solved in 20 years. So the science will go fast, just like the science of universal access went pretty fast, or the science of fire codes, the science of electrification of buildings. Sciences have a huge impact on architecture for a brief period of time. Then they reach a point where the knowledge it quickly reaches diminishing returns. It gets absorbed into codes and law, and then everyone has to follow the same playing field. So science, in some sense, produces the playing field for all of us, but it doesn't answer any of the questions that we need to answer, nor can we do it very well. I point out to you that virtually none of you have studied the history of electrification of buildings. Who was the first architect to use electricity? Who was the first architect to use plumbing? Who was the first architect, and what's the best building to use rigid insulation? So these are crucial changes to the architectural world. Probably nothing has happened in the world of building that has affected the world more profoundly, save one instance, than air conditioning. Air conditioning has completely transformed the world, its sociologies, its economics. It's destroyed the summer in the South. It created an entire industry called the summer blockbuster, where Jaws by accident was released in the summer because no one thought it would have any audience, and all the kids went to it. And the next thing you know, the Hollywood industry started its process of universal infantilization, which is where it is right now. And all we get is one stream of another after summer blockbusters, and then we get this period of minor films waiting for the next summer. So, next slide, please. By the way, this slide has nothing to do with my talk, but I was driving around Chicago and I saw this, and I thought, wow, that's fantastic. What does it say? Remedial environmental manpower. And I thought, so REM is now opening up a completely new office of sustainability. Next slide. Now, in my life, and in the people of my age in this room, these two equations were the defining pieces of science in the 20th century. These two equations defined our lives and changed our lives. It's the relativity equation, which gave us a certain kind of philosophy, and the second one is the time-dependent quantum mechanics, which basically gave us all our technology. 100% of the technology we use today is based on one of these two equations, and they also are the two equations that are responsible for generating the most wealth in history, these two equations. And so our life is about that. Now your life is about something else. Can I go to the next one? Your life is about this equation. This is the Black-Scholes model of options pricing. I don't know if you know it. The NOVA that discusses it is called the equation of the century. This is the basis of all of the derivative trading that occurred that caused the meltdown. It's also the basis of the most exciting production of new wealth since the other two equations. You have to remember that before the burst, a huge amount of wealth was produced, and it's that wealth we're actually giving back. The $1 trillion we just spent is the $1 trillion in new wealth that was produced in this country over 4-year periods. Now, the thing that's really interesting to me about this equation is it works pretty well. It works really well. But if you look at those ends, see the two ends in the first and second half? Basically, it's the first half of the equation is the cost of the stock, the time amortized cost of the stock, and the second one is the risk taken by the strike price of the derivative. And this gives you a way to rationally price these things. Now, go to the next slide, please. The problem is that those n's are distributions, and so they're statistical distributions of human behavior, and almost always they will behave like blue, but they're not actually the blue. They are more like the red. In fact, they're more radical than the red, and because of that, the pricing model failed utterly and completely in certain rare circumstances, but not so rare. So, for example, the stock market, according to a normal distribution, would crash once every 1,000 years, whereas in the fat-tailed distribution, it can crash more like which it has, which has been more like 8 to 10 times in a century. Next one. And in fact, different populations and different value things have all sorts of bizarre distributions. So these are three extreme distributions and if you plug that into the model, you would get very other different valuations. Now, this is, as a result of this, we have more power in some sense over instrumentation. For example, the driving force behind the boom was the building of housing. Housing was built because there was a desire for housing. There was a political ambition to provide the possibility of individual housing. There is a desire for individual housing, but housing doesn't behave quite the same way as options models do. So when you plug options, when you make a package of derivatives based on mortgages with a house as the underlying value, and you use these equations, which is exactly what happened, you get one of these curves as opposed to one of the normal curve, and that's why the housing market bubble bust. Next slide, please. Now, in the history, I suggested originally that we consider elementary schools as a place where we try to figure out how architecture does good. Because elementary schools are a place, there are two building types that I think is interesting to note that architecture has been excluded from. One is prisons, and the other is hospitals, and that really is, we can't let two institutions with functions that important to us be placed in the vagaries of an architect. You know, it's really too important that people get healthy or get kept out of, dangerous people be kept out of society. We can't let architects screw around with prisons, you know, so we don't do prisons anymore, and we don't do architects. We decorate the outside of them, or we act as general contractors for them, and that's it. But major designs like Ledoux's prison aren't part of our history teaching much anymore. The Corb Hospital is taught as a formal model of landscape architecture. It's not taught as a hospital. So the one that's most under attack now is schools, elementary schools in particular, because yet again, the safety and education of children has become too important, and they are too vulnerable to be left to the problem of architects and their experimentations. Now, if you know the history of, you know, from Tarani through Rossi, spectacular experiments have occurred in relationship to schools. They're a very minor part of the production of the building type. Building type is really the enemy of the discipline, but it's the thing that the profession runs on. So there are millions of schools. There are like 10 experimental schools like Tom Main and Diamond Ranch, and because of those 10, we're about to lose the chance to do 10 more. So I don't know. So, but anyway, Reinhold wanted to do housing, and I thought, okay, so I thought, let's do housing. Housing's good. Most of you know this. This is the single most influential project, not just in housing and architecture, but in the history of architecture, right? All y'all know this? Raise your hand if you know this. This is it. This is the single most important project in architecture, and it is housing, low-cost housing. Here, maybe I'll show you some other images that'll help out. Could you go to the next one? Oh, that's a better drawing of it, maybe. Next. Maybe you recognize it from this. Do you recognize it now? Everybody know what it is? Raise your hand if you know what it is. All the professors in here, first of all, raise your hand, and second of all, keep it up if you actually know what it is. Next. I'm trying to help you out. Next. You don't recognize it still. Next. That help any? Okay, here it is. Do you know this one? Do you know that drawing? Okay. So what I've just showed you is Le Corbusier's proposal for the Maison Domino low-cost housing system, which was an experimental architectural project to provide low-cost housing with a new concrete pouring system. This is a structural perspective. The concrete, it didn't work because you couldn't reuse the trays as they had hoped they would do. It was abandoned. And yet this drawing has exercised an incredible imagination on the discipline for over 100 years. This drawing is 1914. We should celebrate 2014 as the history of this drawing. And I keep wondering, like, I saw it. I entered this field, and people would come and lecture on it. I thought, what's so great about that thing? You know, I don't get it. Finally, now I get it, which is, by the way, now it's why I'm a disciplinarian. It's kind of like I got it. And it sparks enormous qualities of imagination, how we could build for equality, how we could disestablish the ground as land and turn it into datum. And it has all sorts of wonderful qualities, all of which operate for us as members of a bohemian demimond. So as an audience, a small audience with hysterically exaggerated interest in trivial effects. That's basically what I'm telling you is how we do good. So oftentimes I'll take my wife, Beverly, I took her to Mies National Gallery, and which I believe has reasonable claim to be the most important building of the 20th century in combination with Frank Lloyd Wright's Guggenheim. Took her through it, told her the story, was just as exercised as I could be in my passion, and she said, yes, I get it. Who gives a damn? Let's go get something to eat. You know. So I thought you have to understand, one thing I'm telling you is we have to give up the model of a scientific model of a generic constituency for whom we produce reproducibly valuable results. The minute we discover that, which is almost never, it leaves us. So the minute we figure out one thing that works, it goes into pattern books or code. Next. This is a great moment, I think, in the humanism of housing and humanism. It's the Unité. I know Marseille is everybody's favorite. Briey is my favorite. And I'm not going to tell you the stories of the Unité, but I do think it's a sort of interesting and naive moment in architecture's ambition to do good with architectural thought. I want to call your attention to the colors on the left. That will become the key legacy of this building in the future of housing. Next. The project, the Unité, was based on a Soviet building. I forgot the name of it. I'm sure Reinhold will know it. He being a Soviet spy. One that got away, I guess. Do you know the name of this? I can't remember. But anyway, so Korb visited this, and that's where the Unité's come. Next. And then the reason I showed that, Korb's interest in doing good with architecture, I don't know what to say. If you read it, if you see it, if you see the exhibitions, it's breathtaking in its sobriety, in its passion, in its desire, in its attention to detail. It's also not overbearing like Alto or Van Eyck. So he knows when to intervene, and he knows when to withdraw, and he thinks beautifully about it. So he has these series, next slide, he has these wonderful series on the modular. Next, please. Okay, so, go just next. And it's fantastic. So it's an application, as you know, of the Fibonacci series to the human body, but keep going. Many people don't know these series, which is in everybody, every position, sitting down at various heights. And so he understands that there's this problem of standardization, materiality, and structure, and he's trying to find a way to logically respond to the intimacies of the human body in its architecture. And it's fantastic, and it's based on this idea that architecture is intimately related to geometry, and architecture does seem to be intimately related to geometry in the sense that it needs geometry for structural reasons, and it also serves functional purposes in life, and so it seems to marry geometry to life, and it seems, undeniable. Next slide. Until you get this. This is the Vedic man, which is the inscription of the body in exactly the same geometry with an entirely different organization, means something completely different. And so that N, which stood for the normal distribution curve of life's behavior, is starting to give way. It gives way to cultural differentiation. It gives way to vicissitudes of desires, short-lived desires, long-lived desires, identity. So the N that causes the collapse in the Black-Scholes model, the normal distribution, which has got to be the basis of any science of architecture, including sustainability, cannot hold up, cannot sustain its variational possibilities to the demands that are made upon it. So you can think of it a little bit like I mean, there's no real value in the sense of architecture to a horror movie, but if you're going to make a horror movie, you have to do two things. You have to study the history of horror films, and you can't, but the other thing is you can't redo it. All you can do if you copy a horror film, my thing went fast, I got 2 more minutes. Horror film is make a kitsch, cliched, camp comedy. So you have to know all about the comedy, but you have to, you have to know all about the history, but you have to have some intuition and some technique to produce the magic of a horror effect. Next slide, please. Let's skip this. This is, now, the reason, I wanted to get to this. In this month, if you go out and you buy this magazine this month, it's about your brain on magic, and it's a scientist investigating how it is that a magician, a guy named Apollo something, is able to perform incredible magic tricks. So he comes to an audience of neurophysiologists. There are 20 neurophysiologists in the round. He's performing in the middle, and he's supposed to be telling them how he does tricks. And while he's telling them how he does tricks, without their knowing it, he picks all 20 people's pockets. Every wallet, every watch. And so while he's saying how he does it, he's doing it. I brought a magic trick, I won't do it. But, and then he gets hired by the Treasury Department to do the same thing with the honor guard of the, what's the people that protect the president called? Secret Service. So he goes up to the Secret Service, the detail specifically for the president, and picks their pocket, gets his itinerary, gets all the phone numbers, gets everything they've got, and they're told to watch for him. So the point being, even though the scientists know the science, for example, to steal someone's watch, you press the watch onto their skin a little hard. It leaves a memory of the feeling, and so when you remove the watch, they still feel like they have the watch on. There's little tricks like that. You can read them all about in Scientific American. So the question for me is, are we going to be better off trying to study the neurophysiology of the effects that architecture produce, or are we better off understanding that what we are the magicians, that we learn through a whole series of craft and history, and that we have to keep updating basically the same 20 tricks? And maybe invent one trick or new trick. I don't know. Should I do my trick for you? Let's see. I think I put it in all right, I'll do my trick. No, all right, I'll do it. Here's my be nice to people pill. Can you see it? Without this, I'm back to the old Jeff. So I don't know, can you see this pill? So I'm going to take this pill, I'm going to put it in here, and then I'm going to crush it up. I'm going to make a little sound. Now watch. Gone. And does anyone know where it is? It's in this thumb. Okay? It's a great trick, don't you think? So basically, when you figure out how magicians do what they do, it's science. But if you tell anybody in the audience how the science works, it quits working. And I think that's how we do good. We do keep going. So we do good insidiously over short periods of time, and we dramatically change our understanding of who we are as individuals, who the other person is as an individual that I relate to, and what our collective relationships are. And I really think that's our job. Next. The Vedic diagram I thought would, I was thinking Pete Bloom. If I think of housing that's sort of interesting about what I'm interested in, I go to Pete Bloom. And it's the model for post-Corbusian thinking and housing. Keep going. It sets all the basic standards. So it has actually it's very much like the Karl Marx House show, but it's got these cubes, keep going, and every cube represents an individual, but also the individual's identity and relationship to the collective. It makes these beautiful episodes of symbolic form in its voids. Keep going. Next. In an invention of the Dutch, which I think is so interesting, it expresses individuality by changing the color. So there's I'm not an individual. This is the whole Monty Python thing. Next. And that's actually what you see. You see basically collective housing and social housing trying to figure out today how to work out and negotiate the problems of the relationship between the individual and collective, and they must almost always do it with a kind of weird signage, particularly in the windows. Next. But however, like this is the same sort of model. However, the MDRVD Hagen Island housing complex, I think, has a real important quality to it, and that important quality to it is it introduces a new ontology. It's a toy, and all of a sudden, that we are no longer, we're products, we're existential individuals, we're immediate phenomenological bodies, but now we're something different. We inhabit a set, and there's a kind of artificiality about where we are in the world and who we are and what our relationship to the others that's celebrated in the work. Next. Next, I won't go through all this. This is Factum 1 and 2. I think these are the two most important paintings of the 20th century. They're important. They're by Robert Rauschenberg. And why they're important is they debunk the idea of the immediate expression of a gesture. So go back one. Back one, please. Or do I do that? Oh, I can do that. Sorry. Oh, yeah, there you go. What do you know? So the whole time I've been telling this thing what to do. So these are the two paintings. And so, there's the printed part and the lettered part, but then there's the abstract expressionist gestures. But in the two paintings, each one's exactly the same. And so it becomes it's a breakthrough, I think, in who we are, and what our relationships to one another is. But you can't keep doing it. So Tom Friedman, who's a contemporary artist, is interested in taking up the project, taking up the problem. But he does two pieces of paper identically crumpled. And so he further disestablishes the institution of art. $350,000 to do this. And does anybody know how you do it? Because I taught you how. I did too. I taught you how. I literally thought Tom Friedman sat around and bent pieces of paper like this. What he actually does is take two pieces of paper, put them on top of each other, crumple it, and then separate them and get two pieces of paper there. $350,000 for just thinking of that. So I was thinking about Pete Bloom, and we were, this is Michael Meredith and Hilary Sample's Moss Sand, and I think it's an incredible project for the way it works in terms of process, but also just the ambition of it architecturally to think about collectivity, individuality, and the way setting these things into motion and producing a resultant then changes the way and I think of, just to make it short, I think these are to this what Tom Friedman's is to Rauschenberg. This is to Pete Bloom's housing, and I think it keeps it updates it, it reduces it even further from its pretensions in the discipline, but it stays utterly grounded in the discipline and produces fantastic magic effects. In one of my studios, we just copied it, and I thought we fixed it. We just made cardboard models instead of digital models, and we painted it blue. And so this is a studio I teach on collective housing. Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I don't have any tricks. Your glasses. It's nice. Yeah, I learned that trick in London. Yeah. The paper trick. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. Timer. Thanks, Scott, for the opportunity, such as it is, to enter this, or let's say, enter this conversation without really any sense. I'm not sure that either of us really knows where it's going to go, but so I thought I would really offer a kind of explanation of where I'm coming from with respect to some of these questions that may or may not, basically listening to Jeff, there may or may not be immediate resonance, but I think in the conversation there will be quite a good deal of resonance. So if we could get pictures, yeah. So I'm going to read a few things and try to explain what they mean. I get to do that because I wrote them. And it's all going to be to the accompaniment of more or less this picture. These are from this little book, Utopia's Ghost. These are the kind of pieces in the book that signal the housing question.
as I conceive it. And it doesn't deal, the book itself doesn't deal with this question a great deal or directly or any sort of substantial historical detail, but it actually tries to pose it fairly precisely. So first, the question of urban renewal as an aesthetic experience. I really want to insist that what we're looking at when we're looking at this picture, which is not an artwork in any formal sense, but we're looking at an image that's been repeated again and again and again, literally and by extension extrapolated into real repetitions, historical repetitions, is a species of aesthetic experience. But in order to kind of make sense of that, we need to kind of say a few things about this. So this is Pruitt-Igoe, a kind of signal instance of the, let's say, dilemmas posed by urban renewal. Here I'm going to just read a little extract, and hopefully this will clarify why I'm beginning with this. So urban renewal internalized, I think we know, already reified racial and class divides. This is in the 1950s in the US, to the degree that, again, paradoxically, a regime of desegregation was overlaid to compensate for the very partitioning of urban space on which many of these large housing complexes were founded in the first place. And among these, perhaps the most infamous was the Pruitt-Igoe housing development in St. Louis, designed by Lynn, Weber, Yamasaki, and Helmuth in 1950-54. Yamasaki has the distinct honor of having two of his major works demolished spectacularly. And so this is the first one. The double name of Pruitt-Igoe reflects the racially segregated nature of the original plan. The Pruitt section was intended for black inhabitants and Igoe for whites. Though before being built, the two were joined under desegregation laws, the vast majority of the development's inhabitants were impoverished African Americans who had either been relocated from the slums that the new housing complex replaced or had migrated to the city from the rural South. Even before demolition began in 1972, Pruitt-Igoe had become an icon of modern architecture's presumed failures in the area of social reform. This fetishization of its architecture as a bad object has been so intense and unremitting that it has since inspired counterclaims that emphasize political economic factors such as underfunding, administrative neglect, and the de-urbanization of the largely white middle class to account for the project's ultimate demise. This is the kind of, blame the architecture story. Still, Pruitt-Igoe continues to haunt architectural discourse in the United States and beyond, as its demolition is replayed in the urban imaginary again and again, as if to confirm the ruination, several degrees removed, of the modernist utopian enterprise more generally. As a historical actuality and as a still vivid after-image, Pruitt-Igoe brings together several important elements: discourses and practices of environmental reform, where the modern normalization of the physical environment is turned towards the postmodern normalization of the psychic environment, of the sort of management of the psychic environment. The biopolitical reshaping of the city along new lines of inclusion-exclusion through such mechanisms as quote-unquote slum clearance, and the becoming spectral of a utopian future that by the time the project was completed in the mid-50s was already identified with the past. So as an instrument of environmental reform, Pruitt-Igoe sits on a kind of the threshold of a mutation, where the normalization or the sort of management of the biophysical environment that we associate with high modernism, which was given deterministic force by the parascientific functionalist discourse of light and air, still visible in the building's architecture, is internalized within a new functionalism of the mind. So a key marker of this shift was the publication in 1972 of Oscar Newman's Defensible Space, Crime Prevention Through Urban Design, the title of which refers to a quote, model residential environments which inhibit crime by creating the physical expression of a social fabric that defends itself. So on the back cover of this book, which probably you know, of its dust jacket was the same photograph, this photograph, of the partial demolition of Pruitt-Igoe that Charles Jenks reproduced 5 years later with reference to Newman in the language of postmodern architecture to commemorate what he called the death of modern architecture. So throughout Newman's analysis, which integrates the territorial with the affective, with emotion and experience, Pruitt-Igoe stands as a representative example of a terrain vague possessed of an indefensible porosity and figural indeterminacy. So Newman critiques this building on essentially formal spatial terms, both inside and out. That what is physical here is equally psychical is reinforced by Newman's accounting of less tangible characteristics of a building, like what he calls image and milieu, alongside the more tangible construction of physical boundaries to encourage what he calls territoriality. Further, defensible space interweaves micro-opportunities for post-panoptic natural surveillance, as he calls it, in order that architecture might allow mutually beneficial attitudes to surface, if not exactly determining them directly. So it's a kind of classic instance of a sort of, let's say, sociological determinism, a kind of quasi-science being projected onto architecture. So he tells this other story. I won't give you the details, but he tells a story about a fence that's built as part of the construction of a playground, and that changes the dynamic of the place. So he, out of this a series of kind of measurements that are done, Newman concludes that boundaries are necessary in order to kind of, let's say, mitigate the social and economic tensions that were expressing themselves in housing projects like this. So, in other words, how, in effect, okay, so on the basis of this, he concludes, this is an extreme example of territorial definition and is certainly not one which we are advocating, not necessarily building fences per se, but its accomplishments are significant in light of the Pruitt-Igoe failure. The question to be asked is how does one initially achieve through thoughtful building groupings rather than having to resort to barbed wire fences and locks after the fact? That's from Newman. So in other words, how to sublimate the fence into an architectural language that does its biopolitical work at the level of the spatial imaginary. In other words, thoughtful building groupings that inscribe a virtual territoriality rather than through the raw power of barbed wire. That's essentially the question that Newman poses. So while admitting that it may be premature, he suggests that, quote, it's possible that an inadvertent result of a socially mobile and open society is its required segregation into physically separate subclusters which are inviolable and uniform both socially and economically. So you get an urbanism out of this, effectively. Neither here nor anywhere else in the book does he discourage the association of social mobility with the so-called openness of metropolitan capitalism, citing, for instance, rural to urban migrations as a factor in social inadaptability to high-rise, high-density living. In response, and with apologies all the while for its authoritarian implications, defensible space offers a formula of territorial definition plus diffuse microphysical surveillance, both on the ground and in the mind. So that's part one of a kind of case study in the sort of social scientific manipulation of space and form. Now, part two is something that I think you know fairly well since it happened here. At least I didn't experience it here. I read about it online, like some of my colleagues. I'm referring to the Duane versus GSD performance. And which I thought was represented an interesting case study in what happens with that defensible space. So let's just say that I'm just going to quickly give you a take on that. That could be understood, could be titled like something, How to Read the New Urbanism, a case study in the agency of architectural and urban form. And particularly a kind of language of architecture in the city that's built on the archive of defensible space and other such propositions and specifically other such strategies. So like new urbanist ideology more generally, I think Duane's argument is a distraction. It's a kind of feint, so I don't think you should fall for it. But I think it's important to learn to read these kinds of moves. As ideology, it exhibits two primary characteristics that are typical of the new urbanism more generally. Number one, an ironic, barely sublimated, and incoherent, if misplaced, form of red baiting that operates in this case through the guiding metaphor of a revolutionary coup. And I mean that seriously. I know it's written as a joke, but I think there's actual, there's a serious subtext there. Number 2, an intense and unembarrassed mixture of neo-imperial swagger and nationalism that pits its own interests squarely against those of the Third World, exhibited in this case in a gratuitous ad hominem attack on Rahul Mehrotra, my good friend, who I nevertheless therefore know he can defend himself quite well and doesn't need me to stick up for him. But I think this was an intensely symptomatic series of statements that were made publicly and have been circulating, and I think they need to be marked and in a sense resisted. But that said, I would recommend ignoring this ideological distraction and as a sort of counter move and ask how such statements operate as a discourse. That is, as indicators of what can and cannot be said. So the fact that such statements can be said publicly, can be made publicly, particularly the point about, like, let's say, who's going to take care of the Third World versus who's going to take care of Europe and North America, that this is a kind of embarrassment, a sort of disciplinary embarrassment. And I think that needs to be, that is, in a sense, a function of the contours of a discourse over which the participants actually have relatively little control. That's what a discourse is. It's a thing that writes you just as much, if not more, than the thing that you write or you speak. So, in any case, under what historical conditions does this argument, this so-called argument, Duane's argument, become intelligible in the first place? Well, it becomes intelligible under what was long ago called the postmodern condition, but not, however, in the stylistic sense, but in the discursive sense, in which aesthetics and politics meet in very specific ways. And again, this image is a kind of guiding aesthetic figure for this condition. The entire new urbanist operation reproduces a series of narrative fictions that are derived from such sources as the pseudoscience of defensible space, as though these were statements of fact that lead to other facts, such as those that you can see here. So this is the sort of, as it were, real-world replaying of the Pruitt-Igoe story this is in the interest of a certain form of rebuilding. In turn, such statements, these statements and the ones that are said in the papers and so on and so forth, and the institutional structures and financial interests to which they correspond construct boundaries around what is thinkable and sayable. Instruments such as the form-based codes operationalize and enforce the norms that are established within these boundaries. So another instance of normalization. As signaled by the designation form-based, this is accomplished in strictly aesthetic terms that forsake the regulation of function or use and concentrate almost entirely on the regulation of formal articulation. The premise of which, however, is essentially to deregulate land use and delegitimize state sovereignty in correspondence with the political economic regime of private property and home ownership. This, in turn, is channeled at the sociocultural level through code words like community and made visible in an aesthetic therapy designed above all to soothe the markets and the family values that circulate through them around and around. Thus, the basic strategy of the new urbanism's rhetorical pseudo-humanism is to fake left and go right. So what you're looking at, this is a Hope 6 so-called affordable housing development in Jersey City, New Jersey. There's a real Duane Plater-Zyberg project just sort of down the road from this. This is you can sort of see it's a sort of fake one, if you like. But I think it represents a sort of fundamental sort of case in the kind of interaction of aesthetics and politics, because this is what I'm concerned with. It's so how, in some sense, do aesthetic statements and political statements and practices meet? At what point and in what ways do they sort of interact? And I think the new urbanists have really they have understood the sort of postmodern interaction of these things as a kind of general discursive phenomenon, and they found ways to intervene. So this whole operation really does need to be acknowledged and in some sense respected for its, shall we say, effectiveness. That what's effective here in addition to certain kinds of sentimentalities and so on, which we can talk about, but are a series of narratives. These are historical. These are stories that are told about history. Modernism failed. Pruitt-Igoe failed. Therefore, one must, X. And it's exactly in these kind of narratives that you get something like a kind of performative. You get something like a sort of speech act that says, on the basis of this, apparent conclusion, the possibilities, however compromised, however contradictory, they may be, of something like collective housing that is not built by developers but by the state or by some other accountable entity, are taken off the table. So if you try to say the word public with respect to housing, for example, today in public in the U.S., it meets with a certain, let's say, resistance, because we've been trained to not, in a sense, be able to imagine that something like public housing, social housing, etc., is a feasible alternative. And so you have to say affordable housing and speak of things like public-private partnerships and so on and so forth. The point here is not so much the immediate political economic one. The point here is to sort of at least mark the relationship between that formation and a certain aesthetic formation. Okay, finally, so continuing, just going to quote myself again to conclude. Okay, well, given all of this, what is to be done? Well, start from the beginning and reopen the housing question. Recall the example of public housing as emblematic of the allegedly failed modernist utopia par excellence. Recall also that this corresponds with a boundary problem that summarizes the discursive economy of postmodernism, the ostensible problem of distinguishing what is real from what is not, thus the consideration about the truth. Historical attempts to confront real irrationality, such as the failure of the state adequately to house its population, are, time and again, converted discursively into phantasms, such as the straw figure called Pruitt-Igoe. These, in turn, are summoned as quote-unquote realistic cautions against too ambitious plans to address the ongoing failures. In this way, cultural postmodernism has continued to serve as a training manual for the systematic abjection of human life accomplished in other spheres. A plausible response might therefore be to derealize the real. Derealization, however, must be accomplished at two levels. First, by interrogating critically the givens assumed by anti-critical realisms, and second, by restoring the unreal, i.e. utopia, to its proper status as a kind of performative, a kind of counter-performative to the process that I was just describing. In other words, derealization means learning to think at the intersection of representation and production. It means doing so through the mediation of cultural forms, including architecture. So it's really that mediation that I'm trying to, in a sense, offer as a contribution. That what aesthetic and cultural forms do is that they mediate. They operate at a very specific level. They play by their own rules. They generate a series of, let's say, effects and experiences that are in many ways, in some sense, specific, but precisely through the capacity of let's say, a formal code to do that they enter the world. And they interact with the world. So this is a kind of this sort of axiom that I like to use to describe this sort of the further inside you go, the further outside you get. It's a kind of it's just I use it as a reminder always to myself and to students that the, in a sense, specialized sphere of disciplinary activity is precisely the point of contact. Perfect. With which we operate discourse in the world, right? So that the sort of opposition that Scott, I have to thank you for quoting my little scheme there. That you quoted is as you say a false opposition at some level. It's a productive one, inside outside, form, politics, whatever, but in fact, it seems to me as the sort of strategies that have been so effectively deployed by the Congress of New Urbanism, I think, demonstrate that precisely by working at the level of something like architectural form, one engages these other, in a sense, extradisciplinary practices. I did want to say one more thing in 1 minute here, that the work that I do really is, I don't know if what I'm talking about is relevant, you consider it relevant to you. And I say that in sincerity because really what I'm trying to do in formulating these problems in this way is not actually tell you what to do. I'm speaking mainly to the students. It's sort of more interesting to me to see what you do and respond. So maybe we're working on different sides of these things, but specifically, for me, one of the most important things that we can learn to do is to translate, is to move in and out of our particular realms, or let's say spheres of activity, or spheres of expertise, in order to articulate different dimensions of what we can call paradigmatic problems. And I consider housing as, and particularly the problem of, let's say, housing in relation to markets and the role of the state and so on, all of these sort of vexing questions that modernism in different ways and different forms dealt with, and postmodernism, generally speaking, attempted to, in a sense, bracket out. These belong to belong to the family of questions that we can consider in some sense paradigmatic, that operate the specific discourse in we can even say universal ways. So with that, I'll conclude. Thank you. Okay, so bring my.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're done.
I have half as mine. I'm going to start with a question. Do you mind? First of all, as always, it's brilliant. I'm always listening to Reinhold, thinking, first of all, God, he's really smart, and I remember when I was really smart. Second of all, I'm trying to think, even though he's very careful, you're very careful not to instrumentalize your thinking, I feel obligated to think of what it would mean to instrumentalize it. And I think, not to make it too historical, Guy Debord was trying to figure out how to respond to Bataille's critique that it's impossible to do architecture that doesn't serve instantiated power. And basically, Bataille for a long time made it impossible for any architect to act. And Debord, through the détournement and the dérive, gave ways to act so that you could be covertly, not even, I wouldn't say even covertly subversive, but you could begin the problem of loosening the stronghold of institutional life through architecture in architecture. And I think a really good example that, I mean, it's not a housing example, but a good example or an example that I love is basically if you go to Koolhaas's Prada in New York. It's basic, you go in there for the purpose of buying clothes to get looked at. And the mechanisms of voyeurism and display are so intense there, you basically can't buy anything. And so it shuts the other reasons. Well, yeah, none of it fit me, but I tried. So, you know, I think rather, I mean, and that's why, the reason I'm saying this is, rather than a kind of exegesis of the truthful consequence of the intersection between a certain kind of politics in art in architecture, I'm sorry, in political life, and another kind of politics, which is aesthetics. I mean, if I disagree with anything, it's that you imagine there's politics and aesthetics, whereas I imagine there's one kind of a politics in a certain kind of social behavior and another kind of politics in aesthetic life. That that the trickster is going to be a much better model than the truth teller. And I know I keep concluding I'm right. It's been my history. Sorry, Boyson. But yet again, and I'm curious about that. I mean, there's a sense that you must not act if you always are acting in service of the insidious politics that you identify. And
oh no. I mean, if you're concerned about that, no. So you're saying that there's something disabling about that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I know.
Entirely,
for sure. Yeah. Although, by the way, it's worth noting that, one of the Situationist favorite targets was Sarcelles, the housing complex outside of Paris. So they were definitely the enemies of social housing. I actually don't think that it's, having thought about this problem and also experienced it as an architect in a variety of ways, dealing with it in teaching and so on also, I really have concluded that that's not the case. In some sense, I see it the other way around. I see that really we have no choice but to act. The question is, what do you do? I mean, that's why you ask the question: what do you do? What is done? What is to be done? And action can take many forms. I certainly wouldn't want to privilege, let's say, like going out and building something, which carries with it one set of compromises, versus, teaching in a northeastern private university, which carries with it, and so on and so forth. Different. In each case, there are going to be contradictions. But I think one of the things that architecture has been really good at, I mean, I really, many examples, the one that I'm using with defensible space and all of that is maybe a kind of, it's a fairly well-known one, but it's been very good at sort of performing symptomatic acts. And those acts tend to channel power relations. I think that's basically what's going on with new urbanism, and I'm trying to kind of explain that. So number one has to somehow diagnose that, and that's probably the move that I take it that you're saying, well, okay, once you figure that out, that's the sort of truth-telling moment. Mm-hmm. Then what do? Well, in a sense, you have to, I think, learn to operate without foundations. You have to learn to act without certainty, without, in a sense, the metaphysical conviction that you speak the truth. You have to learn to act, nevertheless, in the name of something. And so in this case, I mean, this is actually a very modest and very, very limited proposal that I'm actually making here, that if we learn, that one of the things I suggest that we learn to do together is to attach the word public to housing again. And I consider that an act. It's both in the sense of the Speech Act, but also in the sense that it, in a series of possible futures, would involve a different idea about the city. It would involve a different idea of the use of the Black-Scholes equation, and it would make the Ambani building in Mumbai seem even more obscene, and so on and so forth. Because with those acts, there would be, in a sense, of course, a set of ideological convictions that could be themselves demystified, as the Situationists did with respect to social housing. The role of the state in this is I mean, a complete fetish. I mean, it would be insane to sort of say, oh yes, let's recover the sort of instrumentality of the state as a patron for architecture, just like in the good old days of the Marseille Bloch and whatever. So no, it's not that. What architecture is capable of doing in a sense real life is gathering is operating as a kind of contested, an object of contestation. So to say that is to actually contest something, to contest, let's say, the new urbanist thing that I was showing, and at the same time to suggest that there could be something else that could be put in its place, and that something else is what we actually design and do in studios and things like that. That would be in some ways equally contestable, precisely because it cannot be metaphysically grounded in some uncontestable regime of truth. But one of the effects that would have, I think almost certainly, what that would lead to would be very unpredictable, but almost certainly would have the effect of in a sense, producing or at least gathering a public together around it. And I think that's something that I really can sort of commit to as a sort of value to the thing. A public, a series of collectivities, probably a series of publics, even counter-publics even, who object to the state of affairs that they've been sort of, in a sense, forced to live in, and seeks collectively to change that. So that's the point. I mean, this is the historian's point, in a sense. If you know anything, if history teaches us anything, it's that things change. And this is how they do it.
It seems to me that history, it's interesting. History teaches us anything is that it's a really bad predictor of the future.
That's true. Yeah, that's for sure.
And so I keep wondering why we keep trying to use it to do that. But I want to go back to this question of, there is still in your discourse, admirably, an idea that one can give a compelling and demonstrable exegesis of a circumstance.
Yeah, sure.
And you have offered one of the new urbanists. And Bob Somel, actually I think you and Bob Somel agree that their instrumentality and their effectiveness is something we should use as a model. And his argument was we should pose alternative lifestyles so that there's not one, because so far we've just said we don't like new urbanism. So he was saying maybe we should have, California modernist, a whole series of new urbanisms. I have a slightly different, because of my background. I worry that you imagine there's a difference between a story and a narrative. Any text will unfold to many compelling stories, and they will be mutually exclusive. If you tell one, and you tell one with a certain passion and rhetorical fervor, it will stand as the demonstrated. And I'm not, like, for example, for me and you, and I agree with you about new urbanism, that's the story of new urbanism. If you don't mind, most of you saw, I don't know, let me pick something easy. Forrest Gump. Did y'all like, raise your hand if you saw Forrest Gump. So I'm going to tell you a Reinhold Martin analysis of Forrest Gump, okay? How many of you like Forrest Gump? Raise your hand. Okay, watch this. Okay, if you're interested in filmmaking and you're interested in technology, then the in-cutting of the Photoshop realism was fantastic. It was quite funny. It was entertaining. If you're interested in subtext analysis and you're particularly interested in feminist subtext analysis, here's the story. A dumb white guy goes to college, plays sports, is truly nice to everybody, goes to the war, does well, saves his best friend, comes home. He gets extremely rich. He meets the president. He plays ping pong. I'm sorry. So everything is perfect for him. If you're his girlfriend and you are unhappy with your lot in life and you decide to leave your hometown, become a political advocate, take up a life of art and activism, you are going to die of AIDS. So now how many of you like Forrest Gump? Boy, that took some nerve. So the trickery of telling a story is something I deeply admire. The univocality of that narrative as the dominant narrative is something I'm suspicious of, particularly because I'm pretty well practiced at perverting it. So I can tell you 2 or 3 stories about Forrest Gump, and that would shift attention to the film chemistry or the lens chemistry or the racial issues in it. And so as you do that, you continue the process of manipulation, and that's, I think, I don't know, it seems insidious and it seems like something we should fight against and rail against. But actually, I think it's the only thing we do that's effective, that we, and that we should basically multiply stories as opposed to believe the one that carries with it the most passion as if it were the truth. And so I'm worried about the story you tell about new urbanism.
Yeah, sure.
Much as I hate new urbanism.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I mean, look, I want to say that in some sense, I am in about 3-5 minutes in this case trying to get at what we can call the truth about new urbanism, right? And in that respect, of necessity, bracketing out other possible truth, other possible, shall we say, stories. But I think, you know, what matters to me in this particular case is not so much that there are, I mean, of course there are, you know, hundreds, dozens. This is a text, any text, all texts write themselves in all kinds of ways. But that actually, that kind of postmodernism, the postmodernism that says that basically there are many, many stories and we could just tell any different one. And you know, I don't know if that's what you're saying, the sort of anything goes sort of narrative. I actually don't think it's true, to put it simply. And I don't. It's not that, again. It's not that I don't think it's true because there's some metaphysical kind of, you know, kernel in there somewhere that obscures. But rather that's not what actually happens. What actually happens, so that's what for the, let's say, concerns that I'm trying to enunciate, truth happens. It's an event. It happens in the form of, let's say, interactions of power and knowledge. It happens at the level of contemplative experience. It happens at the level of, like, out there in the street, political activity. It happens at many levels, and one of at least the intellectual's tasks is to discern the levels at which something like truth, in this sense, truth small t, happens, and so yes, it is a bit like pulling the the curtain away from the wizard. But there is, I think, a caveat to that, because I mean, this is Walter Benjamin, you know, in a sense, did away with that problem a long time ago with respect to historical materialism. That the interesting thing is that when you pull the curtain away, there's nothing there. That it's not as though when one, you know, as it were, reveals in some ideological, sort of ideology critique kind of manner, what's really going on here, that one finally and without without illusion is able to see the truth. No, but what one does is that one in a sense intervenes in a situation, in a discursive situation. One redirects the power knowledge relationships, and so you know, that's really what I'm wanting to get at. Like, under what discursive conditions can we say, in this very, very mild and modest way, the word public, again, with respect to housing, and attach that to that in architecture, right?
I'm looking at, actually,
I know, yeah.
I'm looking at the crowd, and everybody's ready to say public again.
Yeah, okay.
And I'm sitting here thinking, well, I can make them feel the same way about public as I just did about Tom Hanks. And, you know, should I do this or not? They seem to be like,
go,
no,
if
they
you
like
want,
what
but
you're
then
saying.
that's we're gonna, you know.
And they like it. And I thought, well, I'm not going to make them my enemy.
I should also let them.
But public, I tell you about the public. The public is either the let's say from a science point of view, the public is a non-existent generalization of collectivities that none of us are part of.
Yes.
You know, so, and I would like to meet that public one day. They seem to have.
That's what's not behind the curtain.
I know, they're not there, exactly. But I'm going to propose an alternative. You know, Milton, I don't know if you've had, I know you've read Milton Curry's analysis of the New Urbanist Charter. I don't know if you had a chance to read it. Milton Curry did something else, for example. He took the New Urbanist, Milton Curry's now I think at Michigan, he was at Cornell, brilliant, I think, social urbanist, and he's African-American, graduated at the GSD, somehow has absolutely turned me down as I have been trying to do everything from make him teach for me or to marry him. I mean, I just like the guy. anyway, he wrote this brilliant analysis, and what he did is he took the New Urbanist Charter and went to a crack town area of South Central LA, and with each of the things that are the sign of a healthy New Urbanist community, like street corner trade, front doors instead of back, people sitting on the front stoop instead of the back stoop, low cost, low speeds. The community that he was now analyzing as a perfect New Urbanist community. So for me, that's more effective than telling me what's wrong with New Urbanism, in the sense that I think there's some intelligence to New Urbanism that we could probably confiscate from them, magic up a bit, and beat them at their own game. It's the resistance model. It's resistance through rhetorical passion. My president until recently believed in the creation, and and I believe in the creation too. It was a little weird to have the president of the United States will say, yes, I actually believe the cosmos was made in 6 days. And I thought, okay, well, he just had much longer days. His day turned out to be 2.1 billion years each, but that's okay. It only took 6 years. Yeah. So but if you listen, for example, to the Tea Party people, you will think forgive me, from my point of view, being an old leftist, blithering idiots. But when I think through their arguments, because they are basically saying this country was founded on a kind of radical individualism, and all opportunity at all hold. What do you call it? No holds barred opportunityism. Like, if you can make it, you can pay for your own health care. If you can't make it, too bad. And that there is such a thing as family and community to take care of some of that. But basically, the country was founded on that kind of radical entrepreneurial economics, and it's true. And so, it's true in the sense of your truth, or the truth. It holds up to historical scrutiny. It's, the question really is that where we are today? Is that the values we want to have? Is Katrina the consequences of that? And so I feel like you have to mobilize numbers of stories about the same regime. And then the other thing I think you have to do is figure out, like, the model of the minor practice. If you need architecture to be a major practice, if you need it to be radically instrumental in a short term on specific problems, it fails miserably. And it's actually indulges that failure as part of itself. It loves itself as a tragic failure, plagued by clients, plagued by technology. If you try to pay attention to what architecture has done more insidiously, like an art practice, it's unbelievably successful. And I suppose at the very least you'd have to, for example, the book that if I remember correctly, one of the major criticisms of Defensible Space is it had no counterexamples. And so stuff like, I forget the name of it, the housing community in Detroit by Mies van der Rohe. Lafayette Park, built the same year as, perfectly mixed use, mixed community, mixed ethic, thriving community. And so we don't get to see the two together. And I think that's when I get suspicious. Like, your presentation doesn't show the counterexample. It vilifies the vilification, but it doesn't give me the freedom to decide between other models and other alternatives. And so I actually accuse you of being a cheap huckster, radical rhetorician on the model of Elmer Gantry.
There you go. Excellent. I'll take it.
As my closing comment.
Fantastic. Okay, let me just quickly respond to Elmer here. And then I think there are hands, right? Let's just say that, we agree, not necessarily you and I, but some group here, that things generally must change, right? That what's given is insufficient, inadequate, unjust, and it really has to change. Then the question of how to change, and what basis, on the basis of what values, through what ends, in the direction of what particular future necessarily comes into focus, right? And at that point, it seems to me that it's not as though all options are equivalent or on the table. All the possible stories that you could say about this particular future sort of are equivalent. They tend to get very, very specific, and if anything, they can be described as, in effect, strategic. Now, it is possible, that the examples you're referring to about other kinds of responses to the new urbanism could be deployed strategically. That's to me great. I mean, that's fantastic if that can be done. What I would like to know is what is the future what's the project, basically? Because it's something to know about the new urbanism generally. I think that maybe is not so well understood, that this is probably the most faithful and loyal extension of modernism that we have. Why? Because it has a project. And yes, and it's for that reason. And they're not afraid of master plans. They do tabula rasa. They do all that bad stuff, and then they kind of smile and apologize with the porches. So in that sense, the problem, the sort of epistemological problem, shall we say, that gains a very specific articulation in architecture that really doesn't translate very effectively to the other arts and humanities, to the social sciences, and so on. The question of what's the project. I think we know how to talk about that. We do it all the time. We talk about it in studios. We talk about it in offices. We talk about it in juries and whatever. But to really kind of, let's say, aim that project, knowing very well, not because it feels good to feel bad for yourself, but knowing very well that you're going to miss the target, that you're going to miss, that it's precisely the nature of the project to sort of, in a sense, to swerve, to in a sense, the ruse of history to trick you, not so much for you to trick anybody else. That's to me a kind of responsibility. It's a responsibility that I feel actually is in effect materialized in the discipline. So I mean, it's not so much that it could just be anything. So anyway, it seems that there are questions.
Good.
What Reinhold has said. But actually my question here is, what makes you, within the context that you teach, what makes you pick new urbanism as your target?
Are you asking me?
Because, at places like Columbia and Harvard, it's like the kind of thing we've already agreed beforehand to hate.
Sorry?
It's the kind of design we've already agreed beforehand to hate. I mean,
yeah.
Oh, wait,
right.
okay. And, it's like nostalgic, whatever, right? And when I read your work and you criticize, you use this term like technological triumphalism, this kind of like calculating psychic effects and turning them into form or whatever, what I read is basically an underhanded attack on a lot of things that you're, well, it is underhanded because I think it seems to me you're really attacking, the people who play with play with Maya and whatever and turn those into dazzling forms, or and you're really attacking your colleagues who are taking all of these right. And so for me, like within your context, you're telling people to hate certain things they already have decided to hate. And
I thought you said you were on his side.
Oh, I am, but okay. I agree with his like.
I just want to make sure I understood that.
No, I agree with his premise. I'm just because I'm not sure you're. I'm not sure you're.
Yeah, I think I hear what you're saying. I mean,
telling the students, on the one hand, they're absorbing all of these things, and you're just sort of letting it fly by, and then you're telling them to inveigh against something else that they already hate.
No, I'm not. First of all, let me really be clear. I'm not telling you or anybody else, my students included, that you should hate this or that. I think actually,
just telling you they're evil.
Well, no. In fact, I think you should, in some ways, in many ways, respect the New Urbanist Project as a project. Not necessarily. I don't respect its kind of long-term aspirations, but that's different than saying that I don't like the look of the buildings. The sort of stylistic tricks. Because actually, by the way, one of the responses you'll get is, "Oh, don't worry, you can do, parametric houses in the kind of form-based codes also." I mean, there is in a sense a faction of the new urbanism that will answer that. So that's not the problem. In fact, actually, one of the things that's worth noting is that this really is the original parametric architecture. Christopher Alexander is the kind of father figure of the whole operation, and whatever, we can do the history, but that's one of the interesting things to think about. What do these let's say practices that seem opposed or seem distinct that you're describing, what do they share? What premises do they share? And so in that sense, yes, what I would, let's say, prefer to think is that what I'm offering is a kind of challenge to those premises. And, we could again speak. The premises, the question is not so much what's, for example, to be sort of made possible within the parameters, it's where you set the parameters. You all know this. I mean, this is a kind of basic design problem. How to make it stop or how to, bracket it out. And the question of what gets bracketed out and how the decisions are made, whether you're talking about the little porches or, the sort of other kind of formal languages, seems to me more interesting. So it's those kinds of questions that I think are made available by, in a sense, doing exactly what you're saying, in a sense, addressing both aspects of the field.
I have a different, for example, I don't hate the Mumbai building. I'm not even indifferent to it. I like it. I think it's funny that it's pretty much a direct knockoff of a Kengo Kuma project for a cultural art center in Japan, in Tokyo or Osaka, I can't remember. But I don't loathe people that like Barry Manilow. Which or all the nor do I accuse the music industry of politically manipulating the people that like Barry Manilow to accomplish racial, economic. So I try to avoid telling a truth story, but I'm going to tell you what I think is the truth story here, and I'm going to try to time it so it's the last word. But it's what I see operating here is. I want to say this because I also, when I read the Andreas Dwani thing, and I listened, and then I thought the same thing. I remember that scene in Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof. One rabbi makes an argument, and Tevye says, "You're right," and then another guy makes a counter argument, and Tevye says, "You're right," and then the other guy says, "Tevye, they can't both be right," and Tevye says, "Yeah, you're right," and I'm thinking, okay, maybe that's just me, but what's clear about these students is that they're going to live in a completely different world. They are going to be, they're facing a catastrophically damaged earth, no scarce resources, absolute shift of wealth, if there's any wealth left whatsoever, and a population increase that's going to go 50% in their lifetime. Most of us have sustained a 10 to 15% increase in the population as our experience, as opposed to the real populations of that stuff, and we have found it unbearable. So your life sucks. And I'm trying to get you, to feel okay about it. So I'm reading Andreas Dwani, and I'm thinking, I understand, I share some of his values, but I would want the GSD to be dramatically changing, if for no other reason than to create the story of action in relation. The students are going to come in here, they want to know, can they act? Can they act on their behalf? Can they act on the world's behalf? And what they're getting told, and what Andreas pointed out, is they're getting told a story, not a narrative, a story. And I have finally decided, as long as they get told a few stories, that it's the right thing to do. That it makes some sense to exacerbate their immediate interest in short-term successes and then allow them to connect that back to disciplinarity, which they will. And as soon as sustainability is digested into the codes and laws, then you will face the same problem every other architect is, and that is how do you behave given the fact that you're on that same field. But right now, it's the right thing to do. But it also means that and what I think the insidious subtext of your reading of subtext is not just discomfort with wealth, but discomfort, it's the return of an equilibrium model. And that is the naivete that is deeply damaging in the sense that the equilibrium model, and that is, basically the fairest disposition of resources is the equilibrium, that guarantees death for everybody. So disequilibrium is absolutely at the core of creative productivity. So there will be wealthy. It may not be true that the law of taxation and estates should allow the same exact people to stay in power and in wealth in perpetuity. But nevertheless, what we don't want is everybody having what the new mayor of East Berlin announced for Berlin the day after the building of the Berlin Wall, which was now everyone in Germany will have an above-average income. That is a math joke for the two of you that laughed. So I think there is the resistance to Mumbai, and there are people that have, and all of the new urbanists are more or less wealthy people that want to be in gated communities because they're afraid of racial, ethnic differences, and so it's true. I don't feel like I need to engage them. I feel like I'm a part of another bohemian demimon with other interests, that I can operate effectively, that the ecology set up by all these different small groups, it's not a collective individual anymore. It's an ecology of species that overlap. And that's a much more productive model and gives us a way of talking about and telling stories that allow activism, interest, but that don't put us in the situation of having to be oppositional in our practice, naively oppositional in our practices, in support of a model of resources that will guarantee failure, which is what the equilibrium model does.
I think you just called me a communist.
Yes, I did.
I'll leave that to the audience.
By the way, that's true.
And
any other questions?
yeah, and as such, you performed one of the principal speech acts of postmodernism. There were hands I saw.
Oh, up there.
They were back there. Where? Oh,
Hi,
sorry.
thank you very much. Professor Kipnis, earlier on in the talk, you were saying some things about typology and housing, and you showed the Maison Domino, and you showed also Michael Meredith's moth sand thing. And the moth sand thing, the aesthetic as a whole kind of it reads as this indeterminate form. You know, you read the parts, and those help you understand the whole. And the same thing seemed to be the case when you're showing I guess it was the Dutch housing, where you see the color pattern. And I'm wondering, in terms of thinking about public housing, do we need to think about an aesthetic where the parts determine the legibility of the whole, as opposed to where the whole determines the legibility of the parts? And I think, one example would be the moss sand as the type of aesthetic category. Another, we might look at, say, like Bjarke Ingels' work, where typology is rather symbol, and it's more about an effect. Typology equals effect. It's not about the organization of the parts. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on that?
I'd have to come up here and teach an incredibly expensive course that over a long period of time to actually give the full answer for that. Moistened, I didn't see that. No, but there's time and duration to effects. I mean, there's two things that I think that are occurring today. One is we understand I think Sylvia Levin's work on the value to architectural discourse and the canon of short-term of architectural effects, flash-in-the-pan effects, fads, the bell-bottoms of architecture, is absolutely crucial and important. So I'm less interested, and that's what I think Sam Jacobs and and Bjarke are, they're mobilizing a kind of flash in the pan fashion in architecture. I think that the analogy, there's three things I wanted to put on the table. One is the 6 values that you should remember of housing, which is what produces a lot of the after codes. There's cost, comfort, convenience, pride, pleasure, and familiarity. If you match those things, have any of you taken courses on any of those? No, I don't think so. And the reason you haven't is when you walk into an office, you're going to learn it in 15 minutes. And you can go to Lowe's right now and buy a book called 200 Ultimate Plans. It costs $19.95, and you can get 200 really fantastic plans that match all those things. And so I don't really see that as the role of education. I think the temporality issue, so the comparison between the Pete Bloom and the Moss project, the analogy I wanted to make was the same as between the Friedman and the Factum 1 and 2. And it has to do with the risk of approaching de-disciplinizing the work to the point of absurdity. I mean, so I think Moss Sand, which I don't even think is supposed to be a housing project, it's just an experiment, But by the way, I think it would be fantastic housing. So if you look at Pete Bloom's work, it's just like the Rauschenberg. It does a lot of the work the Rauschenberg does, but it also makes beautiful patterns, and it's a pyramid in a cube. And so when you look at the Moss Sand, it's a little bit like a Caravaggio with the Saint. Who's this saint? The famous Caravaggio. Anyway, John the Baptist. So he paints John the Baptist, and he leaves out all the trappings that would identify the person as a saint. No halo, no aura, no staff. He also sexualizes the character and puts him in deep conflict at 22 years old. I don't know if you know this painting, but you can imagine it. A super radical assault on the canon of how one painted the everyday in relationship to the sacred. And that's something you have to keep mobilizing. And you keep working on it. It's like how do you make a new horror movie? We change, they change, the Vedic diagram comes in, we go eat Indian food. I mean, there's so much stuff happens that basically it's constantly a battle to make a new trick work. And what I so much appreciate about the Moss Sand is the utter absurdity of it and the completely reasonableness of it as a model of collectivity. And more importantly, it's not about individual versus collective. It's about the relationship, how one builds an ecology out of species and the economies that occur between species. So I don't know if does that answer. If you want to understand that answer, talk to your hiring agent and or come study at Ohio State. But it's basically, that's my model of how architecture does good, and I think it does fantastic good. You must not drink.
It was at what?
Yeah, go ahead. You were agreeing with me the whole time I was there. Okay, that's
just
good.
about to see how much I agree with you or
Okay.
don't agree with you, because I'm going to do something similar to what the first question did, except with a different target this time.
Oh my God. You're gonna appreciate me to death, right?
Pretty much. I agreed with you in terms of the magician, in terms of mystification, all that. I thought that was compelling. As we all know, Bart said that the best way to deal with myths is in fact to mystify it in turn. So I think I'm with you there. However, I think what's a little bit disturbing about some of the comments you've made tonight and the position that you're espousing is that you say you want alternatives, but
Sorry.
Me or him?
yeah, sorry, Professor Kipnis. Yeah, Professor Kipnis. You
I
say
don't
you
know
want
this guy,
alternatives.
Professor Kipnis, but I'll ask him if I meet him. Jeff. Okay.
But in some sense, you seem to be saying that we have to work within a certain condition that we must take for granted because that's the condition of our world, and so we have, if we can't beat the new urbanists, and then in some way we have to join them by taking on certain aspects of what they do successfully. In other words, that we just accept a certain capitalist mode of production and of a capitalist marketplace as the defining underlying basis to all of our lives and all of our work. And so, in fact, I'm wondering what is the true value of these alternatives that Bob Summel describes, if we have California modern here and Florida modern there, if, in fact, we are forced to accept this underlying basis. So, in some sense, you're accusing Reinhold Martin of searching for a truth. I think, on the contrary, it's the new urbanists that are suggesting as if there was some ultimate truth that we all had to accept, which is a kind of economic and social model that we take for granted today.
I mean, I guess the short answer is yes. We live in an economic ecology that's no longer us, but a world economic ecology, and has been for a long time. Ecologies of plenty and ecologies of poverty are measured in the degree of the robustness of the numbers of species and the way they interact with each other. So as far as I'm concerned, freedom is not freedom from authority, or which is what I think the model of disestablishing insidious power relationships is about. Freedom is the freedom of the multiplication of real choices. And I'm not sure what I'm supposed to want in terms of I don't want to live there. I don't want to do it, but I don't want them to have to not live there. So I don't understand why there cannot be a proliferation. And the reason I think it's so interesting in the music world, particularly in the non-classical music world, this power over matter has proliferated to the point that it's a now perfect model for small group democracy, or not even democracies, sort of new association of freedom and democracy. There's nothing at stake in music anymore. There's no debate between, I don't know, Bob Dylan and Jimi Hendrix. But everybody is part of a small group, and most of those groups are not proximate. And so and the reason for that is that the liberation from material practices occurs in music and painting much earlier. The power over matter in architecture that we have today is virtually brand new. It's where painting was in the 18th century. And it's a little bit scary that right when we gain this power over matter through digital methods and material methods, it's right when we're about to go broke and not have any materials left. It's right at the precipice, interestingly enough for me. But you might as well theorize the possibilities of the power over matter, because the catastrophic collapse will take care of itself. So I don't really think, I don't see why we need a dialectic model of opposition when a model of speciation is the diagram of response to resources like ours is taught us in almost every situation we analyze, whether it's biological or economic. And so, yes, so the answer is yes. We don't accept it in the sense that if you really want to fight a particular kind of practice, like economic hegemonies, then go into economics. If you want to fight unfairness in totalitarian regimes, then join the army. There are instrumentalities for every possible practice, but the idea that every practice in an ecology of practice would be obligated to one metaphysical ideal is wrong. And it's basically not what sustains the far from equilibrium structure of productive ecologies. There's something called paidomorphism. I don't know if you know what this is that in certain ecological regimes, like in amphibians, if there's a huge abundance of resources, it will skip going into the adult phase and stay instead of a frog, instead of a tadpole turning into a frog, it'll stay a tadpole because there's such an abundance of that and start to mate. So it can skip the adult stage. And you can go back and look at the 80s and 90s as a kind of cultural paidomorphism in architecture, in which you get an incredible infantilization both in form and in, it makes perfectly good sense in terms of understanding that scarce resources. I don't lament it. It's just we're not there anymore, and you do have to make adjustments, and those adjustments are going to be partly causal, but mostly disciplinary. And I don't see why vilification in a non-actionable way helps us make decisions that way. And on that note, I'm forced to excuse us so that those of you that need one can go get a drink. Okay, thank you.